An important couple of days for Theresa May, and I'm joined now by RTE's Europe editor, Tony Connelly. Tony, good to have you on the programme. Thanks for joining us. According to Leo Varadkar, we all know this was the summit where the clock would run out. This was the deadline when the Irish border was going to have to be resolved once and for all, except that it isn't. Has the Taoiseach's bluff been called?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Taoiseach was put under a bit of pressure over the meaning and the nature of this summit, and he is under increasing political pressure, I think, domestically. I think the bipartisan approach to Brexit in Dublin is fraying a little. He did, though, say that it was important to get the right kind of deal, and if that took until October, then so be it. That's what he said back in March. And I think, okay, obviously the British government put forward their proposal on the backstop on the 7th of June. There was considerable dismay, I think, in Dublin at the nature of it. They felt it was half-baked. But the way the European Council works, they don't like to apply vetoes or deadlines because if you hold up the negotiations, then you're not going to get the progress anyway. So I think Dublin had to swallow the medicine, and now we are in a situation where we're waiting until October, where that's going to be the next big rendezvous and crunch point on this.
Yeah, so the buzzwords in the run-up to this summit were acceleration and intensification. We were here in December at the last summit and everybody was talking about the backstop. We thought that a deal had been done, and then it unravelled very quickly when it was clear that the two sides, the British and the Irish and the EU, didn't agree on what they'd agreed, seemingly. Well, where do you think we are tonight as the heads of state or heads of government can meet just a couple of hundred yards away from us? Where are we with the backstop?
I think it's we are in a much narrower situation now with October coming up. That is really the deadline, because you're now getting into a series of constraints that are legal constraints. Article 50 runs out at the end of March next year. The backstop has to be legally operable in the withdrawal agreement, and that all takes time. So while I think we have kicked a touch here in this particular summit, once the white paper and the Chequers meeting next week get underway, that will kickstart, I think, a much more decisive phase. Now, I know we've all said this before, but I can't see how much more kicking of the can we can get, because October really will be a deadline.
How difficult do you think it is for the Irish government dealing with, and the other members of the EU, of course, dealing with a UK government which is still effectively negotiating with itself?
I mean, I think the Irish government is used to it at this stage. If you look back to the referendum, the complaint from the Irish government time and again was that the UK wasn't speaking with one voice, and there were rival factions within the Conservative Party and within the cabinet, and until that mortal combat was actually resolved and a clear position put forward, it would be very difficult for Dublin or any of the other capitals. I mean, Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister tonight, said the very same thing. Who are we dealing with? Is it Theresa May? Is it some other pole within the Conservative Party and the Cabinet? I think perhaps a more frustrating element from the Irish government's point of view is that they felt there was an agreement in December, and that now the way that the UK apparently is resiling from that agreement and putting a different interpretation on it. There is a sense among some officials that I speak to that London was negotiating with its fingers crossed behind its back, and there is quite a bit of anger and dismay about the nature of the British paper that was put forward a few weeks ago.
Let's just talk about the wider context of this summit and the EU in general, because this issue is meant to be top of the agenda. It isn't. It hardly features at all, because they've been talking about other big issues affecting all of the other states, like migration. There was supposed to be a joint communique issued tonight. Then we heard that one country wasn't prepared to sign up to that. We gather that's Italy. The context is that the EU is a much more fractious organisation now than it was even just a few months ago. I mean, it's never been straightforward, but at the moment there are all kinds of big issues playing out, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, this summit has been entirely eclipsed by the migration issue. It's not the Brexit summit that we all thought it would be. And that is simply a reflection of the big existential problems that that Europe has. I mean, the migration crisis really was 2015, but we're now seeing the outplaying of that politically because of various elections in Italy and elections coming up in Germany. It's certainly an irritant for some member states. They would rather not be dealing with Brexit because of these other big issues, but it is still, especially for a country like Germany, and also a country like the Netherlands, which has a very big trade exposure with the UK. What's happening there is their minds are now being concentrated on the contingency for no deal, rather than looking more creatively at the future relationship. I mean, the Dutch are frankly worried. They are training hundreds of new customs officials in the event that they may need them in October.
It's an intriguing situation. It's going to keep you busy for the foreseeable future.
So.
Always a pleasure, Tony. Thanks very much
Thank you very much
for joining us tonight.